famous last words. So, hello everybody. Before we kick off, I'm just going to do something to get your blood flowing a little bit, which is to get you to wave your arms in the air and go woo. So I'll do it on the count of three, and I'm going to take 360 selfies of you to post online. So if you don't want me to do that, I power behind your arms. So 3, 2, 1. So woo. And do one more for good measure. 3, 2, 1. Okay, good. So that got the blood flowing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about robots, a little bit about AI, a little bit about education, and really where all these things come together. So hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun sort of cantering around that general area, and then there are some quite dark and dystopian aspects to this, but we don't want to dwell on those, but we can't not think about them. So this isn't going to be one of those sort of Silicon Valley breathless hype presentations. We are going to start to think about those things, and hopefully it will set the scene for the discussions that are coming in this segment. So you heard a little bit about GISC from my colleague Phil Richards earlier on. Just to reiterate where we're coming from, we're trying to do sector deals, we're trying to provide advice and guidance, and we actually already run quite a few major services. So if you're from a university or a college, you probably use Janet, you probably use EduRoam, you probably use GISC Mail, and things like that. And we're always trying to look and see what would be the next thing. We're doing a lot of work with startups right now. We kind of think that probably we can help to accelerate startups, so be a little bit like an EdTech capital centre, if you like. And my role in all of this is really to be looking out for new stuff. We're looking out for new technologies, but also for new partners, potentially, that we could help to get to both in research and education in the UK. But that's enough about me. See that robot there? Has anybody seen Pepper before? That was at our DigiFest conference back at Easter. We'll see a bit more of Pepper later on. What I wanted to do in this session, we don't have a lot of time, but I want to sort of run through a few things. So first off, some near future careers, and I hope you'll see that they're actually, when I say near future, they're actually quite near future. How do we actually equip our learners to cope with some of these changes that are happening at an ever accelerating rate? And then particularly, this is the question I'm most exercised about, is what happens to people who are left out? What happens to people who need some help? What happens to people who need a leg up? And let's call them the digitally disadvantaged, but that can mean a multitude of different things. So let's talk about DNA editors and asteroid miners. So this probably sounds like science fiction, right? So this is the jobs board. This is LinkedIn's jobs board for folk doing CRISPR DNA editing. There are lots of jobs already for this. So DNA editor, you know, if you've got grey hairs like me, this probably seems like science fiction. Yeah, there's loads of jobs for people to do this. DNA editor is a job, it's a career, it's a vocation right now. So it's quite an interesting question to ask, you know, for folk here from institutions, is this something that you're helping people to do right now? Is there something, can I take a course? Can I take a course on CRISPR at your institution? Is that something that you aspire to? I'll give you another example, drone engineer. And again, we might think, well, that sounds a little bit sci-fi. Here's on Indeed.com over 300 jobs for drone engineers. So drone engineer is, again, it's just a thing people want to do. And this question actually about these new careers, these new vocations that come along, when they come along at a fast rate of knots, and I'll come on to a third one in a second, actually how easy is it for us to pivot what we do at our institutions to start to offer training, to offer education for people who want to take up these new vocations. And then asteroid mines. So again, you probably think, well, hang on, you know, this is definitely stuff of science fiction. Go to this website, planetaryresources.com. This is a company that is hiring asteroid miners right now. They don't have all of the bits in place to get those people up into space and do mining. And in fact, those people might not be the asteroid miners. It might actually be robots that do the asteroid mining. But you can apply now at do it. Do it today. That button there is an apply now button to be an asteroid miner. So that there again is something that seems quite sci-fi, but is a real thing right now. Why do we think that there might be lots of asteroid miners? Well, I don't know, people have probably seen this footage from SpaceX. Has anybody seen this before? So one or two people. So this is SpaceX's reusable rocket booster. This is the first stage of the rocket that would take people or cargo up into space. But it's landing, it's coming back down again. This thing does $100 million, and traditionally we fire it up into space, it would burn up in the atmosphere, and that'd do $100 million, it's gone. It just landed. And actually, just recently, the first one of those reflew, being refurbished. $100 million, and the conservative estimate is it will cost about $1 million to refurbish it, refuel it, and fly it up. That's a 99% reduction in the cost of getting into space. So as a car-carrying futurist, I don't have any compunctions at all about saying that there will be a lot of people in space soon. And SpaceX will be doing this, perhaps not every day, but probably every week. You know, your own children or grandchildren might find themselves up in space, maybe even being asteroid miners. So there we are, there's lots of stuff happening. Life comes at you fast. How do we help our learners to get to grips with this new world? It may well be that as you are studying, let's say you're studying for a traditional campus-based degree course, you've got maybe three years on campus, you're studying when all this stuff is happening at the same time as you are studying. We've been doing a bit of work at JISC on building digital capability, and some of you, I think, have been on our digital leaders course. We've got a whole bunch of resources that you can get which are free to download and Creative Commons license, so you can reuse them and reproduce them. And we think that things like this could be a big help, frankly, for people who are struggling to get to grips with what these new digital technologies mean for us. So by all means, do go around the topic of our resources, and if you use them, tell us what you do with them. I'll put my contact details at the end. It'd be great to know how you are using this stuff which we've created or co-created with people like you. But that's enough of the sales pitch. So what's actually happening, it's very interesting to see, okay, some institutions are responding to some of these new technologies, some of these trends, but also we're seeing quite a lot of activity in the private sector. And I picked a particular example here. This is Udacity, who I suspect most people here are aware of, online course provider. Although they're a spin-out from Stanford, they're offering now a self-driving car engineering degree, a nano degree they call it. It's kind of equivalent to a master's degree. Costs you $2,500, and it takes you several months to complete. By the time you've done that, you'll know as much about self-driving car engineering as your mentor from, and they're partnering with this, with people like BMW, McLaren, so it could be a self-driving Formula One in maybe a couple of years' time. Mercedes, a whole bunch of companies, no universities. So this is very telling for me. You want to learn to be a self-driving car engineer. But it'd be quite nice to see a few universities there. There are, in this country, there are quite a few universities that are doing a lot of work in this area. Are people interested? Well, they announced this last September, and almost overnight, we had 20,000 people say, yeah, I want to do that. A couple of days later, it was 30,000. And if you look at the map, the heat map is pretty much everywhere. So our concept of doing that kind of higher qualification is that we come to a bricks and mortar institution, maybe we spend several months, maybe we spend a year or two there. These people don't really want to do that. They want to learn how to do this particular thing. Let's call it a micro qualification, a nano degree. They're not interested in all of that other stuff. They just want access to that information. So I think that's very interesting as a sign of a different model of delivery that connects into these new technologies, but also as a sign of demand, because they can only take about 250 students on a cohort. So you can't actually have all 30,000 odd people who say, I want to do this. somewhere else, or they wait. So all of us here who are involved in education, potentially, we can help them learn this stuff, and this could be quite transformational for our society. So there's the thing. But actually, how does this work? And under the hood, self-driving cars work by using machine learning technology, which is a fancy way of saying neural networks in most cases. We tend to call it AI. We fall into the habit of calling it AI, which makes it sort of all mysterious. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes demystifying it here today. So here's a picture of a Tesla Model S, which is one of the most popular high-end electric cars. A lot of people who have a Model S have something called autopilot, which is kind of limited autonomy. But it turns out, actually, there are quite a few Tesla Model S's on the road. In fact, nearly 100,000 of them with this self-driving feature. And the people with those cars have already driven over 140 million miles. Why is that important? Because every mile that they drive on autopilot, they're training autopilot to replace them. They're training it to do what they do, so that eventually they'll be able to get back, read a book, go to sleep, and the car will drive itself. That should give us pause for thought, because we have, in this country, we have over 370,000 taxi drivers. And this is essentially going to replace them. We have 3.5 million truck drivers in the States, and this is essentially going to replace them. It might not happen straight away. Actually, if you try and do this around town, chances are it's not going to end well. But over time, this may well happen. And all these people are doing this right now. You might not realise it. If you pass a Tesla on the autobahn, on the freeway, on the motorway, you might well be in this autopilot mode where it's driving itself. So think about that. You might see one in your town. I wonder if it's driving itself. Very interesting to see what Uber have done in response to this. So Uber said, actually, wait a minute, that should be us. We should be doing this. I talked about how institutions sometimes find it difficult to pivot. Well, here's a company that's pivoted from having no assets, famously no assets, like Airbnb. You know, the assets are all other people, the gig economy. Uber decided that they needed to have their own fleet of self-driving cars. And they actually did this by poaching a team from a leading US university. And the guy there is actually the head engineer of that team. So there's another thing, actually, with the power of social media, we can just get in touch and say, hi Joe, how do I get a job on your team? Which is quite an interesting thing in itself. But Uber decided to make that huge pivot in what they were and what they were about, which I think is very interesting. I'm going to show you a little bit of machine learning in action. So this is Google's DeepMind AI learning to play breakout. So it had a few goes. What does learning to play breakout mean if you're an AI, if you're a neural network? It doesn't know how to play breakout, but maybe it knows that if your game lasts for a long time, you're doing well. So how could you maximize your length of your game? And you can see after about 600 training episodes, all it knows is it moves the paddle back and forth, how long this game lasts. It suddenly discovered how to always win at breakout. You'll always win now. And in fact, don't ever try playing DeepMind at breakout, because it will whoop your ass. It will always win. And I trained it to play quite a few other games as well. You can see it playing Space Invaders and another bit there. That actually, it might sound a little bit trite, but that's really how that self-driving car is working behind the scenes. And again, I'll play you a little bit of a video here. We don't have time to hear the whole thing, but let's get a self-driving car's eye view.
We've taught the vehicle to recognize and navigate through construction zones.
So this is
Our
Google's
sensors spot the
self-driving
orange signs and
car.
cones early to alert the car of the lane blockage ahead, and we can change lanes safely. You'll also notice the vehicle typically moves to keep.
So I'll stop it there, but you saw these objects here, these wireframe objects. These are things that it's recognized are pretty confident. That's a car, that's a pedestrian, that's a cat that ran out in front of me. They won't necessarily know what all these things are at first. Over time, and there'll be hundreds, maybe thousands of training episodes, it reaches a point where it will be pretty confident that that's a cat going out. or that looks like a stroller with a baby. So that's what the computer sees, but actually maybe that's good enough to drive the car. And we could watch
A safe
this.
distance away
There's
from
plenty
my
more of
house.
this.
Like this truck stopped on the side of the road.
Road cones, cyclists, pedestrians, it's pretty confident at recognising them. Next time you go on a website where they have a capture, one of those funny little images, and you're required to type in the text on the image, have a look at it, because you'll find right now a lot of them are street signs. Why might you want to type in what's in a fuzzy picture of a street sign? You're teaching this to drive, actually. So when you get a capture, next time you get a capture, I'll set you a challenge actually, if you're on social media, next time you get a challenge that has a street sign, tweet it and tag me on your tweet. I'd like to see what you find. Where does this lead? Well, actually it leads to a point where the neural network, the so-called AI, you can actually start to ask it to do things for us, other than just recognise stuff. So the car is going around and it's recognising an obstacle, it's recognising a road curve or whatever. This is what I do if I see one of those. Here's what happens when you pit two neural networks against each other. So one of them is quite good at recognising cats. In fact, it's pretty much an expert. It's seen thousands of pictures of cats. Show it a picture of a dog and straight away it's saying that's not a cat. The other neural network, and they call this generative adversarial networks, the other neural network's job is to create pictures of cats. And actually this one does handbags, it does shoes, and it does buildings as well. But its job is to create a picture of a cat. And it's got some parameters, so you do a little sketch. So I want a cat that's like this, tail up here, pointy ears. And it produces something which, I don't know, you maybe struggle to see it right, but it actually looks pretty cat-like. And you might notice, if you get really close to it, you might say, hang on, that's not really a cat. But it looks pretty much like a picture of a cat. You can also draw monsters. So this is a cat monster. And it will faithfully go away and create a cat monster. But this is something that's never existed. It's something that the AI, as we call it, dreamt up for us. And I think that's really fascinating. But there's a deeper thing there, which is actually, we hear a lot about AI, we hear a lot about machine learning, and they're quite abstract and hard to grapple with concepts. It's hard to drill down and say, well, what's this really mean? How do I use this? That's a piece of research which is open access. The code that they wrote is open source. So if you're one of those learners, if you're one of the people who want to be a self-driving car engineer, and you're thinking, my local university has nothing for me, Udacity have told me that they might be able to fit me in 2 years' time, I want to go off and learn about this stuff. You can download that. You might not choose to make monster kittens, you might make something quite different, but the code, the details of how they arrived at, all of that information has been made open access for you to take and use as you wish. I think that's a very interesting point, because a lot of people, they get a bit between their teeth, they become very interested in something like this. And there is so much out there, particularly in machine learning and artificial intelligence, there's so much out there that you can get for yourself. You can learn about it, you can find out. And you actually don't need someone else to help you with that. And how far could that self-directed learning go? Well, ultimately, of course, there are lots of things where you need some sort of certification. You need someone to say, actually, this person probably is okay to write the software for the self-driving car. Like if you just wandered in off the street and said, let me write some software, and your whole family will be shuttling around in this car, you might say, well, hold up. Who's telling me that you're actually reliable? So we think that a lot of these techniques, and I think you maybe saw this slide in Bill's talk this morning, we think that a lot of these techniques actually are quite relevant to learning analytics. So we talk about learning analytics in the sense of gathering and using data about students' interactions with institutional systems, with each other, with staff. And that's kind of where we are right now. We're doing a lot of that. We're creating dashboards. We're doing a little bit of predictive analytics. But we think that there's a lot more that can be done to think about space. So how do we use space in our institutions? Buildings are quite expensive things. They've cost a lot of money to run. Are we making best use of them? Maybe we can use some of those analytics to help with that. All the way over to curriculum design, and dare I say even generating materials we use in teaching and learning. And again, you might say, hang on a minute, that sounds a little bit science fiction. Are you really sure about that? I'll give you an example in a moment of somebody who's doing that. So I think that this is a journey, fundamentally, that we're on, and most of us are down here. But to get to the other side, we need to be very sure about what we want to do, how we want to do it, about the ethical implications of it. Because we are talking particularly about information that comes from students, which has to come with some sort of informed consent in what we do with the information that arises as a result of students interacting with those institutional systems. So, AI for generation of teaching learning content sounds a bit sci-fi. Here's a company that's actually doing it. So this is Wildfire Learning, who were the winners of our DISC startup competition earlier this year. So they're really doing it. And what they're doing is they're taking the stuff that you, if you like, would have lying around, but you don't have an instructional designer to help you craft it into a course. And what they're trying to build is something that will bridge that gap for you. So you can come along and say, make this into engaging course material that I can use in my handouts, and I can use in my slides when I do a lecture presentation. Will they succeed? Maybe not. I don't know. It's very interesting. So okay, what happens if you're not part of this? What happens if you're one of those people that sat there going, well, isn't that great for you, but I don't have the internet, I don't have a fast computer at home, all of these things are not available to you. But also, perhaps more critically, what happens if you're one of those taxi drivers? What happens if you're one of those truck drivers? What happens if you're one of the people who is likely to be threatened by machine learning, by robotics, by some of these other things we talked about? And I don't have too much time here, so I'm going to really canter through this. But here's an example of a robot that looks like a robot from everyone's science fiction readings of probably the 70s or 80s. I'm saying, looking around at people with grey hair. I always imagined that one day we would actually have robots like this. This is a robot called Pepper. And Pepper is actually working in lots and lots of places already. I'll watch a teeny bit of a video here of Pepper. Pepper is a working robot, typically working as a greeter in a restaurant or a hotel or a shop. Pepper follows a script. But it's quite convincing.
Okay, when I think it's good.
Okay.
So, I am a robot. You're a human.
Thank you.
And this is the beginning of a beautiful story. I like humans. Humans are so cute.
They're so cute, and I maybe I can keep one as a pet. Pepper is only following the script. Pepper doesn't really understand what you're saying to it. But yet, it's still successfully displaced lots of actual humans doing human jobs. And over 10,000 of those robots have been sold. Other places have put them in as a kind of curiosity. You'll see the robot, maybe you'll come in Japan, you'll find them in mobile phone stores. So you come in and maybe they'll ask you if you want to renew your mobile phone contract. Another example I'll play you a teeny snippet of. This is a robot from Amazon now called Betty. Why it needs to be gendered, I don't know, but there we go. So this is what happens in the Amazon warehouse when you place your order. These little robots scurry around, moving the shelving. So the shelving moves to the human who puts your stuff in the box. It's really quite fascinating. Amazon bought the company that made this, and they're very interested in robotics, as you might imagine. They're also quite interested in the next challenge, which is a robot arm and software that could pick quite awkward, delicate, complex objects up out of that shelving and put them in a box. So a handful of people that right now work in the Amazon warehouse, maybe their days are numbered too. And here's Jeff Bezos. He's very interested in robots. This is Jeff Bezos at the Mars conference last year. Jeff believes that we'll need these kind of anime-style robots when we start to colonize Mars and build green bases and things like that. And as a self-respecting billionaire, he has his own space program, so he can do these things. So I said it wasn't all good news, and there has been a little bit of an undercurrent of, well, actually, a lot of things that we take for granted right now, a lot of the occupations that we take for granted right now, if it can be distilled to an algorithm, if it's something which is kind of repetitive, it doesn't necessarily have to be a blue-collar job. It could be a white-collar job. It could be a job in any stratum of society. Then eventually, an AI, machine learning algorithm, neural network, a robot actually could come along and replace one of us. Hopefully, that won't happen too soon. We'll all have time to prepare and find other things to do. But perhaps it will happen sooner than we think. And there's a real question there about the certainties that we have about our role in society, and particularly the vocational aspect of it. A lot of us, perhaps more than we realise, view our lives through the lens of our vocation, the lens of our job. What happens if that goes away? What happens if we get a basic income simply to keep the wheels turning, to keep us functioning in a capitalist society? But we still have that need for a greater purpose. And what will we find our greater purpose to be? So I think that perhaps more than anything, that's going to be one of the defining questions of the next 20, 30, 40 years. But I don't think it's all bad. And I couldn't say that really, because then I would leave on a bit of a downness and, well, we came down in the sky, made us all feel really bad about things. But the actual truth is, we're seeing a whole load of new careers opening up here. Remember what I showed you at the beginning? All those people that want to be self-driving car engineers, if we work in education, how can we help them to do that? We should be asking ourselves that question. How can we help them to be DNA editors? Are we helping them to be asteroid miners? And those are just a tiny fraction of the new careers that are coming along. There's a very interesting diagram here that a strategist called Simon Wardley uses. Some of you may have seen a diagram that shows pioneers, settlers, and town planners. So town planners are people who write 5-year strategies, they keep KPIs, and they monitor progress against them. Many of you are town planners here, I'm sure. Pioneers are people who come up with crazy new stuff. We're going to do asteroid mining. Get away. And 5 years later, you're thinking, wow, we're all doing asteroid mining. We're all right. There's a gap in the middle. And all I said, I think quite a few of you here are town planners. I think a lot of you are the folk in the middle, which some call settlers. And they're the people who take that crazy new thing, they dust it down a little bit, file the rough edges off, make it understandable, make it usable, so that the town planners can say, right, okay, fit this into our strategy. And that, I think, is probably my key message for you today, is think of yourself as a settler. Think of yourself as a settler. There's all this new stuff coming on. You've heard a lot of stuff just here today, and we'll hear some more before you leave today. How can you help? How can you help to socialise that? How can you help your town planners to build it into what your institution is doing? And then things like portfolio careers and bite-sized learning, maybe they'll just fall out kind of naturally from all. And I mentioned open access and the huge potential that has, open access software publications, stuff that comes out of our institutions. Increasingly we're being told you must open it up. We've just put out a Horizon Scan report, which is all about that trend. So that's my call to action for you, if I have one today, is go and grab a copy of that. And what we're looking at is, actually, is this part of something much bigger? Maybe if we open up more of our stuff, we'll find that that helps to drive a virtuous circle for some of these trends that we've been talking about. So that's me. Thank you very much for having me. I don't know, we got any questions?
You're hanging around at the end, Martin.
I'll be around for a